Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I came across a interesting piece of science news that I think is really relevant for those of us here in the fitness world, and it involves a study looking at brain cancer and what sort of fuel sources different types of brain cancer cells can use. So let me put on my plus 5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And I guess the take home of this, so that we can just kind of come to the short of it of what this means to fitness enthusiasts out there. This kind of debunks the idea, again, 'cause this was debunked with some other data, that people have that if they can just limit sugar intake and do something like a ketogenic diet, that it will help fight cancer. Because this was a hypothesis that was speculated by researchers a number of years ago, but they said, hey, we need to do more studies into this. This is a hypothesis, let's study it. And when they started looking at the data, they were finding that ketogenic diets don't really help with cancer. It was an interesting theory. Well, a theory meaning it wasn't a theory, a scientific theory, it'd be a theory in layman's terms, but it was a hypothesis. And it hasn't panned out very well. And I was one of the people who looked at it years ago and said, hey, maybe this is interesting. We need to look further into this. There might be possibilities here. But, that's how science works. And so they looked at it and concluded it doesn't really seem to help. And when we look at research like this, which I'll link down in the comments below, when we look at this, it makes sense why it doesn't seem to help. Because cancer isn't all about insulin and sugar. Is that a factor? Absolutely. It does seem to be a factor. But what they found when they started looking at brain cancer, they found two different types of cells. As far as what they feed on, because we have the really fast multiplying, the ones that grow really, really quickly, which can be its own aggressive form of cancer. Those seem to feed on blood sugar, right? Which you always tell people, restricting your blood sugar levels isn't necessarily the key to that. It's keeping your insulin sensitivity on point, which has to do with diet, exercise, body fat, right? You don't want to be insulin resistant. We know that being insulin resistant through whatever mechanism, being fat, a bad diet, not exercising, we know that is linked to cancer, right? That is absolutely heavily linked to cancer in all the research that's looked at it, because we know that cancer cells tend to have a very high insulin sensitivity, and so they will tend to compete with other cells for fuel. And so if you have other cells in your body that compete for that same insulin and compete for that same blood sugar at a higher level, it does make it easier to fight cancer off, right? Makes it easier to fight cancer off. But that seems to be when they looked at brain cancer as the fast multiplying cells. But they also know that those cells respond really well to things like chemotherapy and other cancer treatments. What cells they found that don't respond very well to that are harder to fight, are the slower multiplying cells. These ones that are in there that grow really slow and multiply slowly, those don't respond very well to cancer treatment. In other words, it's hard to stop them. They might take their time growing, but they tend to be very, very fatal. What they found is looking at those cells can feed off of pure fat. They can feed off ketones. They can feed off lipids in your bloodstream. All right, well, that's not a good thing. Now, a lot of people will point out, well, don't refined sugars increase triglycerides in the bloodstream? Yeah, they do. But again, we're kind of coming back to that point of any person who wants to be healthy probably isn't picking out on large amounts of refined sugars anyways, and not all carbohydrates do this. And you need to understand that difference there. There's a difference between refined fructose versus glucose-based molecules and everything, and how they affect all of this. So your starchy carbs, even your fruits and vegetables, compared to, say, big piles of table sugar, there's a bit of a difference in the way they affect your blood work, right? There's a big difference there. Hopefully people understand that. If you don't understand that at this point, you need to brush up on some basic nutrition. But as far as that goes, well, what does this mean? Well, it means that really high-fat diets are going to be a problem here. So people who are like, oh, I'll just do a ketogenic diet. Oh, man, I'll just take all this coconut oil or MCT oil, even these faster-absorbing, high-energy fats. So it's like, so you're just dumping more triglycerides into your bloodstream with that. That's not really ideal. Having a bunch of ketones in your body. Let's say people are doing a ketogenic diet, right? You have all these ketones available. taking exogenous ketones. Do you guys see the problem here? That is a fuel source that these sort of cancer cells use very, very easily. It actually seems to be what they burn. So if you have these slower growing malignancies, like in brain cancer cells are looking at, taking a bunch of ketones, exogenous ketones, or being in a deep ketogenic diet, that's not a good situation to be in, because you now have elevated amounts of fat available in your bloodstream, all this mobilized fat. That's not a good thing. That's not a good thing, and that also means that having really elevated triglycerides probably isn't a good thing. But having really elevated ketones is not going to be a good thing either. So here's the other thing we get to. What about people who are diabetics? Well, if you're diabetics and you start approaching ketoacidosis, I mean, I suppose you could see the same situation. It would be problematic. I mean, and that's what we know too, looking at all this research that doctors have looked at. There's a link between diabetes and cancers, right? There's a big correlation between those. And a lot of these things make sense because you have some of the cancer cells that seem to thrive in a high insulin, high sugar environment, and you have some of these others that thrive in a high fat environment. In other words, cancer just simply wants to grow. We have these different forms of cancer cells feeding on different things, and this is what we're finding. That basically means any of these extreme diets are a problem. If you eat a diet that's ultra high in fat, even a ketogenic diet, that's a problem for these cells. If you're eating a diet that's loaded full of table sugar, that's a problem for these other cancer cells. Essentially, what all this means is that it comes back to what we've been saying for a while and realize, what are your best defenses against cancer? A balanced, healthy diet, not eating too much refined garbage, not eating too much sugar, not eating too much fat, being physically active. Resistance training has been found to be the best exercise for it. Cardio and stuff helps, but resistance training helps fight cancers best. Weightlifting, not smoking cigarettes, right? Not abusing drugs. Those are your keys. That is the best cures we have to fight against cancer, because we know at this point, the meta-analysis have looked at it and found that somewhere between, depending on the cancer type, 70 to 90% of all cancer cases are completely lifestyle induced. Only 10 to 30% are purely genetic and not based on lifestyle factors, meaning people led healthy lives that didn't contribute. So by and large, cancers for the most part are lifestyle induced. And you get them by putting crap into your body, whether it's a drug or excessive amounts of refined foods, which kind of comes back to the obesity thing. We know obesity is linked to cancer. We know being sedentary is linked to cancer. So it's basically just putting garbage into your body, irrespective of the form of that garbage, whether we're talking about certain drugs, whether we're talking about certain foods in excess, putting garbage into your body, not being physically active, not being in shape, that's actually the biggest causes of cancer that even exceed genetics. And we know even if you have genetic factors at play, if you do the other things, you have a better fighting chance of surviving it. So at the end of the day, guys, the best you can do is lead a healthy lifestyle. An extreme diet doesn't seem to be helpful, because any direction you go, it seems like you're going to feed one type of cancer cell or another when we're looking at all this. And it makes sense. So ultimately, it's best to just lead a healthy, balanced lifestyle and eat well, be physically active. Don't put garbage into your body, or at least minimize it. That seems to be all we can do. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.